launches tariff war.
China, 67%. That's tariffs charged to the USA, including currency manipulation and trade barriers. So 67%, so we're going to be charging a discounted reciprocal tariff of 34%.
Tit for tat tariffs by China.
China, first row. China, 67%. That's tariffs.
World market spooked. Recession fears haunt the world. Trump good or bad for the world? Global roundtable.
It's been called Liberation Day. United States President Donald Trump's sweeping global duties have sent tremors, shockwaves across the world. Several markets have been spooked. There are fears of a potential recession. Global leaders are alarmed, and no one is quite sure what comes next. In the age of Trump, the world can only watch with a mix of fear and concern over an escalating trade war and what the occupant of the White House intends to do now. It's also our trigger for this week's Global Roundtable, where we will be joined by guests from India and across the world. On the show today, joining us now, Peter Taylor, Director, Institute of Development Studies, Brighton, United Kingdom. He'll provide us a UK-European perspective. Andrew Latham, Distinguished Scholar of International Security and Political Economy, joins us from Macalester College in St. Paul, United States. That's where it's all happening, or that's when it's all started. Joining us from Hong Kong is Andrew Lewing, China strategist and analyst, Hong Kong. Many believe that China is the dragon in the room when it comes to these trade wars. Also with us for an Indian perspective, Shankar Iyer. He's author and columnist who's been writing extensively on economic issues for several decades now. And KC Singh, former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs, will provide us a diplomatic perspective as to how we should be responding to the Trump juggernaut. So the Global Roundtable is the fallout of what Donald Trump has done to the world. And it brings me to my first big question. Has Donald Trump disrupted the world order completely? Are we seeing a total disruption of the world order? I want to come to you there in the United States. Andrew Latham, can you tell us, in your view, is this a complete disruption of the global trade order, or is this just how Trump is?
Well, there's two answers to that question. The deeper one is yes. This is not the 1930s, and it's not the post-World War II era, and it's not the post-Cold War era either. I think we're entering a new era of political economy globally, and it's going to be messy, as it was at the end of the Second World War, at the end of the Cold War. It's going to be really messy, and I can't imagine a figure who could make it messier than President Trump. Now, having said that, I think he's also motivated simply by he wants to do a new deal. This is the language he uses. He wants to do a new deal. He wants America to stop being, as he puts it, ripped off. But I think he's just an epiphenomenon of something which is way deeper, which is that the United States is repositioning itself and reconstructing the international political economy in ways that we haven't seen since 1991, since 1945, or indeed since the interwar period.
Before I move to the other guests, just to push you, do you believe this is part of his ideological commitment that right from the very start of his life, of his career in public life, he's always believed that the United States has lost out because of tariff barriers in different parts of the world, and it's time to sort of rewrite the world order? Is this an ideological commitment?
It's an instinct rather than an ideological commitment, I think. He kind of understands that this is a different moment. but he has no intellectual capacity. And the people around him are also guilty of this. They have no intellectual capacity for grasping the bigger picture, which is we are on the cusp of a different era in the history of the world, frankly, and he's acting instinctively, reflexively, but he's not acting intellectually.
Interesting, very interestingly put. Peter Taylor, Director, Institute of Development Studies in Brighton, United Kingdom. How do you see it? Do you believe that this is the ultimate disruptor who's come in with a mandate that he believes allows him, entitles him to disrupt the world order and, in his own view, restore some kind of an America First philosophy?
Yeah, he's undoubtedly disrupting the world order. I agree with Andrew. And this, his approach to trade and tariffs is one element of a whole series of ways in which he's disrupting the world order. Since he was elected, he's, of course, sowed confusion in multiple ways. He's talked about seizing territory, Canada, Greenland, Gaza, the Panama Canal. He's renaming parts of the world and changing names on the map. He's engaged in ending wars and conflicts around the world, ostensibly for the benefit of America, again. And he's also dismantling federal programs such as USAID and others. So he's disrupting in many, many different arenas, and this particular disruption in relation to trade and tariffs is the latest, and it seems to be a pattern to sow as much confusion as possible, as rapidly as possible. And that makes it very difficult to respond to, which I'm sure everyone is grappling with. I watched the announcement that he made last night, and I could just imagine as he held up the piece of cardboard with, with details of tariffs, that presidents and governments around the world must have had their faces glued to screens trying to see, well, what would be the tariff on the board? Someone remarked it looked a little bit like a board that a bookkeeper would hold at a race with the odds on horses. So I think that's really very challenging in terms of how do people respond to policy making live on television. Absolutely massive confusion and disruption being sown.
In fact, he's even on that board put 50% tariffs for Lesotho. And that perhaps reflects how Donald Trump approaches the world. Lesotho also gets a mention in that black board or that board of his. But Shankar Iyer, there are those who will argue that Donald Trump is doing something that was needed to be done. For much too long, the World Trade Order needed someone to come in and disrupt it. The rules-based World Trade Order was not working. Do you believe that? Do you believe Donald Trump is right with the timing of his disruption, or has he got it horribly wrong? Shankar.
Well, my last week's column, I used a line from Julius Caesar Mark Antony's speech where he said, if that was true, it was a serious flaw. And the U.S. has several problems. Mr. Trump has looked at the problem in different ways, articulated different ideas. The fact of the matter, Rajdeep, is that in the run-up to the Second World War, the U.S. was emerging as a huge economic power, and in the World War, it became a military superpower. Over the last few decades, it has consistently been sort of visualized or seen as a huge military superpower, but its economic power has been on the wane. And how did this happen? Because in the 70s, the US corporations decided to opt for productivity. And they started pushing the policy for opening up foreign direct investment in various places. They are the ones who invited China into the WTO, sponsored its entry, sponsored its growth. So in the end, it is the United States of America which exported its technology, exported its jobs, exported its goods, exported its capital, and exported its exports. Who is to be blamed? So Mr. Trump has got the wrong end of the stick in his view. Now, this action that he has taken covers 68% of U.S. exports. And in this 68%, the one calculation says that they will raise about $600 billion, which means that Americans will be poorer by $600 billion. Even if the United States is a $30 trillion economy, it begs the question, can it survive this onslaught, this assault on its own economy? So I think that
I'll come to the survival question. I'll come to the survival question later in the show, whether this is Donald Trump's first move in what could be a bit of a chess game that he's trying to play as some kind of a political grandmaster or a political disruptor. But let me just go to Hong Kong for a moment. Andrew Lewing, how do you perceive it? How is China seeing this at the moment? Is China seeing this as complete disruption of the world order? The Chinese have already said that they will retaliate.
I think that the Chinese leadership already saw it coming with Trump 1.0, and President Xi at that time already ordered the country to prepare itself for it by focusing on self-reliance and technology, by growing its economy, domestic economy, pivoting more towards internal consumption, and also trading more with the global South. In this way, China is, to a certain extent, has been insulated itself, but of course it can't insulate itself completely because China is the largest trader and manufacturer around the world. And Trump is precisely wants to derail or contain China's influence in these regards. And no doubt there is a total upheaval of the so-called rule-based order. And we have a curious situation here whereby the originator and leader of the so-called world global rule-based order is destroying it, whereas the perceived a blackened challenger, i.e. China, is trying to defend it. And also, you can see that Trump is trying to run the country or run the world as if it is a pure business. There's no sentimentality, there's no kind of values. It's based on transactions. And then introducing, or well, not only introducing, but pivoting towards the rule of the jungle. Rather than a fair rule-based order. So
those are very strong words. Those are very strong words. Rule of the jungle, not a rules-based order. Is that an exaggeration, you think, K.C. Singh, as someone who's been in the world of diplomacy for decades? Has Donald Trump appended not just the World Trade Order, it's the way to do business? Every ally of Donald Trump today seems to be either red-faced or seems angered in some form or the other with what Donald Trump has done.
No, that is true. But I think what is important is that he's got many notions which have no basis in economics. He thinks that tariffs are really money he's taking away from other countries, whereas all this will be paid for by the American consumer. He doesn't understand that. It'll cause inflation. It'll cause, Goldman Sachs has said there's a 40% chance of a recession. The American economy will slow down. He explains it as short-term pain, long-term gain. He's only got 3.5 years of his term left. So he's gambling. If this and the midterms come by the middle of November of 2026, you'll have the midterm elections in America. So if there is inflation, if the people are unhappy, and already we've seen in Wisconsin, despite Elon Musk spending so much money there, they've lost the Supreme Court judge's election. So there is a move, public opinion, even those who voted for voted for Trump, who thought that he'll be handling their problems or day-to-day problems of inflation, he'll bring down, improve the economy, jobs. Instead of paying attention there, he's causing more disruption. But then if you look at the thing, America is today only producing 11% of the global goods and services which are produced. 12% is China and 13% is European Union. The NATO countries are meeting as we speak, and they're going to be asking Marco Rubio, what the hell are you doing? What kind of a NATO ally are you if you're going to be creating this kind of disruption? But I think what may happen is not what Trump has planned, because countries may realign. China, 12% of China, 13% of EU, 5% of Korea and Japan. It comes to almost a third of the global services and goods products which is coming in. You can isolate America. You can create new alliances, new trading blocs. And I think that is the direction which the world may have to go.
Which brings me to our second question on this global roundtable. Is Donald Trump taking the world into a trade war? I want to come to you, Andrew Latham, there in the United States. Is this something that the US is prepared for? You just heard from Casey Singh the concerns that, are being expressed in America itself, that this could set off an inflationary spiral. So there's one thing of taking the world into some kind of trade war, but on the other side, is he going to be able to handle the domestic fallout, or is he determined to push the world into this global trade war?
Well, we can frame it, if you like, as initiating a global trade war. I don't think that's helpful. I think, to be charitable to President Trump, what he's really instinctively grappling with is how, in this post-Cold War, post-unipolar moment, and your previous guest made references to this. This is not 1990, 1991. This is 2025. And I think Trump is trying to grapple with, where does the United States fit? It no longer accounts, as it did in 1945, for 25% of the goods and services produced on the planet. It's now less than China. It's now just in the middle, and it doesn't get to write the rules, it doesn't get to establish the norms, and it doesn't get to build the institutions anymore. And I think Trump is kind of grappling with that. What then, in this post-unipolar moment, should the United States' role be? Should it be totally about advancing American interests at the expense of everybody else? Because it can't be what it was for the last 40 years, which was upholding and policing and maintaining the rules-based international order at the United States' expense. So I think, we're in this, Antonio Gramsci once put it this way, the old order is dying, the new order has yet to be born. We're in a time of monsters, by which he meant Frankensteinish things. That's where we are today.
You agree with that, Peter Taylor, there in London, in Brighton? Do you agree with that Donald Trump is simply, some would believe, trying to restore some kind of balance to to the power shift that's taken away from the United States? He's trying to restore a bit of balance and bring back the United States, in a sense, into a position of power and influence.
Yes, I think that is indeed a significant driver. And I think also, on a very personal level, he really wants to have a legacy arising from his presidency. So a sort of reset of the United States' position and role in the world in relation to the rest of the world is something I think that he would really like to see achieved within this term, which might, of course, extend to a third term if he's able to be persuasive about that. I think as well that it's very challenging, of course, to interpret the extent to which his strategy will work. But someone said recently that perhaps Donald Trump's one consistent political agenda over time, since the 1980s, has been around tariffs. He's often referred to them as a really significant element, you might say, in his approach to seeing America regain or create a new role for itself in the world. So this does feel to be quite consistent in terms of his long-term beliefs. Perhaps other views have changed considerably over time and probably still will, but this feels to have been a fairly consistent part of his approach. So I think what's going to be very interesting is to see the outcome, both in the short and the midterm, to these measures, and then to see how he will react to that. I think the expectation is that his preoccupation with tariffs will continue. I think that's clear because it's a long-running belief. But I think he's going to have to respond to the impact, which will include impact on the American domestic economy. And that's going to be quite important for how he moves forward to next steps.
Because, Shankar Iyer, we are already seeing some countries pushing back. The European Union is warning that it will push back. Canada has certainly pushed back. So has Mexico. And they're almost bringing, in the case of Canada and Mexico, Donald Trump possibly to the negotiating table. Do you believe that this is therefore only an opening gambit in a way that Donald Trump has put, or is he taking the world into a full-blown trade war and a new global trade order?
We must all be charitable to the unfortunate souls who have notions. So let's say that he has a good idea. What does Donald Trump's agenda say? He sees tariffs as a way to increase the income of the US, use that income to retire debt, bring down deficit, onshore industrialization, onshore manufacturing, make his people rich, pay for the tax and jobs cut that way. Now, each of these objectives is contradicting the other objective. So I don't know which school of economics allows these notions to prevail, but it must be said that he has a mandate. It is not that he woke up yesterday and decided. He campaigned on this. He won the election on it. So blame it. If you want to blame someone, blame the 51% of people who voted him on this campaign promise. So he is trying to use tariff as a way to restructure the American economy. And I don't think he gives two hoots as to what happens to the rest of the world. What he must be worried or should be worried about is what it is doing to his own economy. You just have to look at the list of companies.
No, that's my question. But that's my question. That's my question. Is he looking at what impact it's going to have? You know, he talks the language of America first, and yet perhaps the immediate blowback, as you said even earlier when you made your opening statement, could be within the United States itself. We've seen the markets getting spooked, the fears of inflation. Goldman Sachs talking about a 40% chance of inflation, 40 to 50%. So is Donald Trump gambling?
Well, it's a gambit for sure. So here's how one would look at it. I mean, what is at stake here? The 401ks, retirement funds of people. He had promised to bring down inflation. All leaders, Rajdeep, are the sum of what the sentiments of their followers. So Donald Trump is no different. Authoritarian people are similar. I think the same people, when they see the prices going up, when they see inflation picking up, when they see people losing jobs, when they see their retirement benefits going down, they will respond to the political leadership. Donald Trump may want to do a foxtrot at that time or a tango. We don't know.
Well, we don't know what Donald Trump will do next, which is part of the problem. But it brings me to my next question, which is China the dragon in the room? Andrew Lewing, I had Surjit Bhalla, an Indian economist, suggest on my show on Thursday night that Donald Trump's singular aim is to bring China to heel. And that's where all of this starts from. Is China the dragon in the room, the belief that the Chinese have got away with much too much over the last 20 years?
I think that there is a bipartisan consensus that China somehow represents existential threat to the American dominance. And you can see that the jigsaws of Trump 2.0's grand design is beginning to fall into place. He wants to make America great again. And you look at the world map, he wants Greenland up north, he wants Canada, he wants the Panama Canal, he wants Mexico. Now, why does he want Greenland? Of course, Greenland is full of rare earths, and also it provides extra airspace for Americans' defense. Recalling the balloon incident, where the Chinese balloon was looming over a height of 50,000 meters, well above the sixth-generation fighters. So he wanted Greenland and then Canada, Panama Canal, but they're all in the Western Hemisphere. Now, with the whole Western Hemisphere under his Americans' total control, though not necessarily occupation, and with two oceans on both sides, America would be very secure. But does it mean that it's going to give up on the Asia Pacific? No. because Trump doesn't want a war. And the best way to exert the influence over Asia Pacific is by offshore balancing with American.
But how does China but Mr. Lewing, how does China intend to respond? Do you believe that China will come to the negotiating table or not?
I think that China always prepared to negotiate, but of course, as I said, China has been well prepared this time since Trump 1.0 by focusing on self-reliance on technology, and even though China was excluded from the International Space Station right from the very start, even though Russia was a partner. But China was excluded. But look what China has been able to do, building its own space station right from the start.
So you're saying, okay, so I take your point. Yeah, go ahead, complete.
But I think that China is, they're open to some kind of accommodation. The only way to do this is because all the tariffs are not going to bring most of the jobs back to the United States, because the United States is not producing a lot of the stuff around the world, and it's highly uncompetitive because the costs are too high. Now,
I take your point. I take your point, Mr.
It's a very important point. Important point, let me finish. When I visited London last year, I noticed the black cabs in London bear the signature LEV, London Electric Vehicles, with a small c. C stands for Coventry. But that company is owned by China, producing in the United Kingdom, producing jobs. Now that could also the formula apply to the United States, bringing some productions, even car manufacturing to the United States. I think Trump welcomes that. Now, I think that even though China's, for example, cars are so competitive in terms not only in price, but in quality, technology, but that's the problem for China, because China cannot destroy the car industries around the world, for example, in Europe. And the way to do it is using this formula of outsourcing some of the production, for example, in the UK, in Europe, so as to bring back the jobs to those countries.
Andrew, I've taken your point. You believe China is far better prepared this time to a potential trade war than perhaps they would have been even a decade ago. But KC Singh, is China the dragon in the room? Is this Trump versus China? And whatever happens in the next 12 months will depend on how that conflict plays out. If they come to the negotiating table, work out a deal, the world will be perhaps less turbulent. But if they don't, the turbulence will continue.
Rajdeep, if he just wanted to handle China, what was the need to alienate Canada, Mexico, NATO, the whole world? He had started the containment of China during his first term. He's the one who raised the Quad to the leadership level. Biden continued with the same policy. So to contain China, you need Japan on board, you need Korea on board, you need the Australians on board. The Australian Prime Minister is facing an election. And actually, USA has a trade surplus with Australia. And yet America has imposed the tariffs on them. So they said, look, we are not going to take any steps, but this is absolutely uncalled for. So here is an ally which is saying, why are you doing it? I have a trade imbalance with you. You are exporting more to Australia than we are exporting to you. So these tariffs, Rajdeep, are completely brainlessly done. All they have done is they've taken the trade imbalance, divide the exports of a country by the trade imbalance, and that percentage is then halved. So that's how we get 26%. Somebody gets 30%. Somebody gets 40%. It is not commodity-based. It's not. And then what Trump probably doesn't realize, US has a services surplus of $400 billion. Now, if the Europeans and the others go after their services, if he's going to be going after their goods, the others can go after the American services. Then where do they go from there? We can already see Tesla suffering. And in fact, with China, they're saying Musk is keeping Trump from fully going after China. He's got all his business there. So I don't buy this. I don't think this is about China. Okay. This is Trump's global madness. He has some kind of a vision. He's woken up on the wrong side of the bed. And he doesn't have any economic basis on which he has taken his actions.
But Andrew Latham, has he just woken up on the wrong side of the bed, or is this, along with the consistency on tariffs, Trump's stand on China is very clear. He seems to see China as a potential competitor to his vision of making America great again. The whole MAGA coalition saw China as the big enemy out there.
Yes, this is not just about economics, and it's not just about Trump and Musk and their business deals. And this is about geopolitics. This is about grand strategy. And the bottom line is this. Trump is not an intellectual. He doesn't quite get it. But his reflex is this, that hemispheric security is number one, which is why he's interested in the Panama Canal, really, which is why he's interested in Greenland, why he's interested in annexing Canada. I'm Canadian, so you can imagine how badly I react to that. He could go about it differently. He could double down on the strategic relationships with the Kingdom of Denmark, with Canada, with Panama, which would advance his agenda way more efficiently. But we need to be clear. He wants hemispheric security. Number two, he wants to blunt and block and balance China in the Indo-Pacific, not the Asia-Pacific. Nobody uses that word anymore, but the Indo-Pacific. And he really, really, really wants to double down on that with respect to Taiwan, with respect to the South China Sea. So those are the two pillars of the instinctive, not intellectual Trump grand strategy and foreign policy. Hemispheric security, that's why he wants out of Europe, because that's, from his perspective, a waste of time. He really wants out of the Middle East as well, with the exception of Israel. But he wants out of those two regions so that he can refocus on hemispheric security and blunting and blocking and balancing China in the Indo-Pacific. And that's more than economics. That's what his gut is telling him the U.S. should be doing on the global stage.
Peter, you just heard what Andrew said about Trump wanting to get out of Europe, wants as little to do perhaps with his European partners, some of whom are angsting at the moment. How will this play out? Will we see what can Europe really do?
Yeah, it's very challenging because, again, as we said at the beginning, there are a number of issues currently taking place. There's a war in Ukraine. That is right on the border with Europe. So Europe is very conscious of security issues, the implications for NATO. And we've seen ways in which Donald Trump has already used various kinds of threats or forming new alliances with Russia to sort of change the relationship that the US has with Europe. We've also heard very recently in the release of the WhatsApp chat group about views of the vice president and also other senior members of the Trump administration about Europe. So I think we already get the sense that that there are certainly a group within the US administration, including President Trump, I think, who feel that engaging with Europe is no longer particularly in America's interest. I think for Europe, it's a very challenging situation because, of course, the European Union is a bloc which is made up of individual countries. And so each of those individual countries are going to be affected in different ways. For example, France is a significant producer of wine. Champagne, for example, which is very important in the American market. Italian goods, high quality goods are also fashion accessories and so on are also seen as very high quality. And I think the challenge for the European Union is how to create a combined front and respond to the tariff of 20%, which is obviously going to have a significant effect. And already we can see the conversation is very much around retaliation. In the UK, it's a little bit different. I think the UK is positioning itself quite carefully. It's still in the belief that it's possible to establish a trade deal which will be more beneficial. The UK tariff was 10%, which is obviously a little bit of an improvement on that, which has been hit on Europe. But at the same time, the UK is also thinking about, well, how to establish and build an ongoing relationship with this very ephemeral, fast-changing character and an administration which is constantly changing its tune. So I think in the UK, Unusually, there's cross-party support, actually, for a measured, negotiated approach to continue to try to work through this with the US. I think in Europe, and especially the European Union, there's going to be a much more combative approach, and I think that's going to involve quite significant retaliation. And that's not good for the world, because each time a group of countries or individual countries retaliate and introduce their own tariffs, that's having an amplification of the initial effect, which is being caused by Trump's tariffs introduced yesterday.
Which brings me to the India question. Shankar Iyer, will countries like India lose or benefit? You're listening to these voices from across the world, and as was just pointed out by Peter, even within Europe, different countries will have to grapple with the Trump tariffs very differently. Will India lose or benefit? There are those who are saying this could be the opportunity we need to rationalize our tariff system. There are others who are saying that there could be a blowback unless we get our domestic act together.
Well, the question is, does India have a trump card? Pardon me for that pun, but does it have a trump card? Is the US dependent on India just like it is dependent on Canada for hydropower, electricity, or dependent on Canada for energy, or dependent on China for sub-tag category goods which flood its shops, or dependent on China for electronics, or dependent on Korea for electronics? So India has to find that trump card to leverage that. I mean, the ideal way to do that, this would be to have some kind of public-private consultation, discussions, whatever. And I don't know, I haven't heard whether such a discussion has happened. I looked at the list of non-tariff barriers that the USTR has provided to India. And it has, I mean, it reeks of this idea that the US would like, or at least the US corporations who have complained, would like to legislate laws and regulations in India. It's that stark. But leave it
yeah,
at
but they've
that.
given example. No, for example, Shankar, the pharmaceutical industry's got exemptions. Semiconductors have got exemptions. There are others who are worried that it could have potential impact as across the world on auto parts. There are industries which could be hit, industries which could benefit. Is that the way we should see it? That specific, this is not just about a country, but within India, specific industries could take advantage, others might lose out.
Well, that's true. I mean, in the sense that, you have the expansion of the global capacity center, so you would have some business interests here. You can use that leverage. You have the IT companies managing all the US businesses, so you have some leverage there. You also need to reform your existing. So the reason why tariffs worry countries is because it evens the competition field, the field for competition. And Indian industry is uncompetitive because we have conditions that make them uncompetitive. 30 years back, I was told by industrialists that give us the same tools and the instruments to compete. What is the cost of capital in India? What is the cost of energy in India? What is the cost of land in India? So India is one of those few countries where energy is not treated as an input. Electricity is not treated as an input. India is one of those countries where we endlessly talk about junking old laws, but we have 69,000 compliances on the book. India is one of those countries. For 10 years now, we've spoken about ease of doing business. It still takes 90 permissions to open a hospital, 110 to open a hotel or whatever, I mean, so these are the things that we should do. We have a very robust automobile sector. Suzuki is bigger in India than in Japan. Should we look at the tariff protection that we give to the automobile sector? You mentioned about pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals has been given a pause. I don't know whether it's really an exemption. So that pause is for them to figure out their healthcare cost. And that is where you will see a large-scale migration of Indian companies setting up plants in the US. And the final point that I want to make, while all this was happening, between March 25th and 28th, Beijing hosted the BAO conference, where Korea, Japan, and other countries, China included, were sitting and discussing how to respond to the tariff on the assault of tariffs that
Right.
Donald Trump has initiated. There might be a shift. I mean, we might be looking at a whole different new world. And Fukuyama might want to write maybe chapter 2, sequel to End of History.
History never ends. And I just want to, Casey Singh, I know you're not an economist, but you're a diplomat who tracks global economies. How should India respond? And here I'm looking both from a diplomatic perspective and from an economic perspective. India, by and large, has been very, very cautious and is trying to work out a bilateral trade deal by the autumn. Is that the way to do it? Do your own deal on the side with Donald Trump, in the hope that that will, in a way, offset some of his anger or ire against India for its high tariffs?
I think that's the approach. If you see the Ministry of Commerce statement today, it is not provocative. It's a bit defensive. It says, we'll see what are the opportunities which are available. It's like was just mentioned, the British are trying to do. They're also trying to avoid confrontation and to see if they can have an engagement. The danger with that is that with somebody like Trump, you may still find that unless he's satisfied, you can do 90% of what you think will satisfy him, and he may still not be satisfied because, it's a blanket 26%. Now, one of the large items we export are gems and jewelry. US doesn't produce any of that. So he's talking of reciprocal tariffs, but they are not reciprocal at all. They are just across the thing completely.
Right.
So how do you really deal with it? And he may want agricultural sector to be opened. Now, what is his problem with the Australians? Despite the imbalance in trade in favor of America, he said they're not buying my beef, and Australians stopped buying beef because of certain disease which was there amongst the cattle in America. So the Australians stopped buying it. So with Trump, it is not economic. It's emotional. He can get into. So I think India is playing the game. Remain quiet. Watch. He may get into domestic troubles. Let him get involved in some of the hassle somewhere else. This is not sustainable beyond a certain point. In the meanwhile, see if you can engage him, see what are the opportunities, and utilize any new openings which come up. Because after all, you push some of the other exporters out of business. Worst affected are Bangladesh and Pakistan. Their garment exports are going to be very badly hit. And India has not been in that. So some of the supply chains may get revisited and relayed.
I just have a few more minutes on the show. I want to bring two questions into one as I conclude. Is the global economy headed for a recession? You can call it turbulent times, but is it headed potentially for a recession, as some are calling it? And the wider question, is Trump good or bad for the world? Andrew Latham, why don't you pick that up? There is a 40% chance, Goldman Sachs says, of a recession. Other ratings agencies, some have said that it could be as high as 50%. Is Donald Trump good or bad for the world? And is the world heading for turbulent times, like it or not? And a potential recession?
Well, that's more than two questions. Donald Trump is a crystallization of the world rather than anything else. He's just the man of the moment. I don't care for him all that much, but he is just the avatar of this particular moment, and there's no way around that. I would also say this, though, from a 30,000-foot perspective, there are two ways in which countries are responding to Donald Trump, one of which is the Canadian approach, which is, as they say, because they like ice hockey there an awful lot, elbows up, right? We're going to fight, fight, fight. The other approach, though, is, no, let's do a deal. Let's try to get under his radar. This is the Indian approach, frankly. So if the Canadian approach is fight, fight, the Indian approach is, let's try to do some kind of trade deal here, which gets us out of this Trump world. But having said that, at the kind of 30,000-foot level, if we back up to maybe 40,000 feet, there is simply, he is the man of the moment. He, Donald Trump, represents this inflection point in terms of global political economy. Again, it's not 1930, it's not 1945, it's not 1991, it's 2025, and he is the man of the hour.
He is the man of the hour. Andrew Lewing, do you agree with that? Would the Chinese agree with that? Would they agree that they are dealing with someone who believes he is the man of the hour, who has this sense of self? Is he good or bad for the world?
Well, like it or not, that's the reality. I mean, he thinks that he's able to bring jobs back to the United States. He thinks that he's going to bring shipping back to the United States. And he thinks he wants to make America great again, as I explained just now.
Is he good or bad for the world?
Control. Well, obviously, uprooting the whole world order is bad for the world in terms that it's going to lead to slower economy, if not total recession. All his tariffs hark back to the Hawley Act in the 1930s, just on the eve of the worst Great Depression in the United States. And if this could happen, then all bets are off for the United States economy and for the entire world, because America is the largest economy in the world, and it's got its relationship and interconnections affecting the entire world. Obviously, it's bad news, but that's the reality.
He's bad news. He's the man of the moment. Peter Taylor, where do you stand? There are some who believe he's the man of the moment, believes he has the sense that this is his moment. Others are suggesting that he is terrible for the world because he's just disrupting the world order in a manner that there is no sense of certitude for the future.
Yeah, I think uncertainty is the one thing we can be certain about now, which is certainly a challenging response. If we think about the ways in which, trade and engagement around the economic order has taken place, a lot of that has been through diplomacy, and now we're seeing policy being made live on television. And I think the ability to respond to that is outside the norms of how negotiations and relationships have been built up over time. So in the sense of it being bad, it's bad certainly that the means that we have at the moment to our disposal globally are being tested to the extreme and possibly will not be sufficient. I think as well we're going to see new alliances forming. Ironically, they may be alliances, including from countries represented on this call, which do not include the US. And the US may actually find in due course it's cutting itself out of global cooperation, which I think in the long term would be potentially disastrous for the US. And what that means for the rest of the world, I think we'll have to wait and see. I do want to say, too, that in terms of is it bad for the world, I think it's going to be very bad for those within the world who are the most vulnerable, who are least resilient, and those who are most poor. Because unfortunately, when we see major climatic events like this in terms of trade, it's often those, for example, day laborers, people on low-paid workers, people in very small-scale producers who are working really hard to create a living in whatever country they may be, including in India and in other countries as well. And from history, we can see that they are the ones who are most affected and suffer the most harm from these kinds of global rearrangements. So I think there's going to be a big question about how countries around the world can support those who are most vulnerable, who are going to be hurt most from this realigning of the world order.
Shankar, is he good or bad for the world?
Well, somebody quoted Glampy a few minutes back, and when I was in Cambridge, I learned Matthew Arnold. So we are caught in a world that is dead, and the other that is yet to be born. And Matthew Arnold wrote about the monks at the Grand Chartreuse. But we are, in geopolitical sense and economic sense, caught between two worlds in many, many ways. I think that whatever Donald Trump is trying may not hold good for the US, may not be a great idea for the world. We don't know what's sort of coming after this. But
do you see a recession? Do you see a recession? The second part of the question, do you see a global recession? Is that a real threat?
The length of uncertainty will define the depth of the recession. The length of uncertainty about tariffs. You can't go around saying, okay, I'm going to negotiate tomorrow. Okay, let the music play. Now let it stop. Now I'm going to do this. Now I'm going to do that. This is not how the world runs. This is not how trillions of the world trade is $24 trillion, and global investments is almost equal to that. You can't mess around with systems like this. So that's what is happening. I have a feeling that the recession will first hit the US and then the global economy. And Mr. Trump might just end up doing exactly the opposite of what he intends to do.
That's interesting. K.C. Singh, is he good or bad for the world order?
I think anything that is that disruptive is bad for the world order. It's bad for the world. You could transition to a new order. You could have reformed WTO. There are problems with it. You could have worked within the existing alliances instead of breaking every alliance that you have. And you have two friction points at the moment. There's talk of Iran getting attacked by Israel and US. If that happens, there'll be a conflagration in the Gulf. And while that is happening, you've got the international trade war going on. So how many wars are you going to have?
And he's walked out. And he's walked out of the Paris Climate Conference. He's walked out of World Health Organization. He doesn't seem to believe in international bodies. He only seems to be convinced about himself and his impact on the world. Is he therefore, K.C. Singh, someone who's going to set up many fires across the world? You just mentioned Iran. The war is back in Gaza. We don't know whether there'll be a Russia-Ukraine deal. So is he good or bad for the world?
We've not mentioned the program is he has not placed any tariff on Russia. And when he was asked, he said, because we have no trade with them, there are sanctions, which is wrong. Russians have exported about $2 billion worth of goods to America. So, the whole world is topsy-turvy. You have a situation where there's no tariffs on Russia, and there are tariffs on his own allies. So what do you say? I think we are in a completely, I agree with one of the thoughts here, that this is a great time when there's so much of destruction. You can rebuild and rebuild new alliances, excluding America. And I think that's what the new German chancellor is saying. They've lifted the limit on deficit financing. Their budgets were constrained otherwise. And they are pushing a lot of money into militarization, military production. And Germany, which is number 4 in the world in terms of goods and services, would take the lead in Europe. I think the Europeans need to take a lead, become self-sufficient in terms of trading with new entities, and let Trump be. Trump will beat his own fate in America at the midterms. The American people will handle him. So in the meanwhile, I think the world should prepare for a new order.
Okay. Those are fine words on which to end this fascinating discussion that we've had. Clearly, whichever way you look at it, Donald Trump is creating more news than any other individual in the world at the moment. And that perhaps is what he intended to do when he won that election. There is the narcissist in Donald Trump, which must wonder how the world sees him. And as I can see on my show, different parts of the world see Donald Trump very, very differently. I think the one thing we can say about Donald Trump with a fair degree of certainty is he's determined to bring uncertainty to the world in the coming months. How will that play out? We'll wait and see. Will he be hoist by his own petard, as some seem to suggest, or will he truly be able to reconstruct the world order? Fascinating questions to look at in this year 2025. I thank all my guests for joining me, and thank you, the viewer, for watching. Namaskar. Jai Hind.